My dad tried to surgically conjoin me to my siblings on the anniversary of my mom's death, using tools he'd laid out on her china cabinet. When I told him I missed her too, he hugged me and whispered, "This is the only way to keep the family whole." I let him cry into my shoulder. That was 6 months ago. Last week, the nurses found scalpels hidden in his pillowcase again. After Mom died on her way back from my sister's graduation, Dad held us all in the hospital parking lot for what felt like hours. Through our tears, we promised him we'd never drift apart, that we'd keep our family whole. It felt like the right thing to say. 6 months later, I realized promises made in grief can become chains. At first, Dad's Sunday dinners were exactly what we needed. He'd spend all Saturday preparing Mom's recipes, getting her spice combinations just right. When my brother Mike started missing dinners for work, Dad offered to review his resume, said he'd help him find something with family-friendly hours. When I mentioned I was looking at jobs in Seattle, Dad's face did this thing, like a glitch in a video, before he smiled and said, "That's great, honey. Your mom always wanted to visit there. We should plan a family trip." I thought he was processing. We all were. The tracking started small. Dad added us to Life 360 because your mother would want me to know you're safe. Then came the Saturday night sleepovers so we can wake up together for Sunday prep. He explained, buying us all new toothbrushes for the house. When Mike tried to skip one to stay at his girlfriend's, Dad drove over at 3:00 a.m. I woke up to 47 missed calls and a photo of Dad removing their apartment door with a crowbar. "Fix the squeaky hinges," his text said. Mike laughed it off nervously, but his girlfriend broke up with him the next week. Dad helped him move back home, humming Mom's favorite song the whole time. The house transformations happened gradually, then all at once. First, our bedroom doors disappeared overnight. Depression thrives in isolation. Dad explained, installing curtains instead. Then he removed the bathroom doors too, replacing them with beads. We're family. We changed each other's diapers. When I tried to shower at the gym instead, I found my membership had been canceled. Waste of money when we have a perfectly good shower here. Dad said. The beds came next. I woke up one Saturday to find movers hauling my bed away. Dad had bought one massive California king for all four of us. Like when you were little and scared of thunderstorms, he said, arranging our pillows in age order. The first night, I pretended to sleep while Dad played recordings of Mom singing lullabies on repeat. He drilled holes between our bedroom walls at connection portals. He called them, so we could share our dreams. He disconnected our car batteries every Friday night and installed biometric locks that only worked Monday through Friday. Our phones went into a time, locked safe all weekend. When my sister Emma got promoted to a position requiring travel, Dad called her boss, claiming she was having psychotic breaks. They put her on administrative leave pending evaluation. "Now you can focus on family," he told her, holding her while she sobbed. The matching pajamas arrived with GPS trackers sewn into the collars, so I never lose you, Dad explained, making us model them. He'd know if we took them off. He knew everything. He'd installed cameras in our apartments while fixing things. I found one inside my toilet tank when it wouldn't stop running. He hired contractors to dig tunnels between our apartments and the family home, showing us elaborate blueprints over dinner. "By Christmas, we'll never have to be apart," he announced as Emma stared at her untouched plate with tears rolling down her cheeks. The cement handprints were when I knew we'd crossed into something else. Dad had recreated our childhood stepping stones, but now demanded fresh prints every Sunday. He'd measure them obsessively, checking for swelling that might indicate we'd been fighting or doing dangerous activities. He made us sleep with our hands elevated so they'd be print-ready by morning. Mike tried to refuse once. Dad sedated his drink and did his handprints while he was unconscious, crying the whole time about preserving memories. The weekend before Mom's death anniversary, Dad seemed almost peaceful. He cooked her final meal, the one she'd never gotten to eat, and set her place at the table with her favorite china, but something felt different. He'd hung family photos everywhere, but our eyes were scratched out with something sharp. Only Mom's eyes remained, watching from every wall. "Tomorrow's the big day," he kept saying, kissing our foreheads with lips that felt cold. When we arrived for the anniversary dinner, Dad had transformed the dining room into something medical. White sheets covered everything. He'd laid out surgical tools on Mom's china cabinet like a buffet. "Sit, sit," he urged, his eyes bright with something terrible. "I've been taking classes online. Did you know you can get certified in anything now?" He pulled out a medical cooler, hands shaking with excitement. Tonight, we stop pretending we can exist apart. He grabbed Emma first, pressing an anesthesia mask to her face as she thrashed. We'll be the first successfully conjoined family. I've mapped out every nerve, every blood vessel. You'll share circulation, share breath, share life. We'll never lose each other again. Mike tried to run, but the doors were barricaded. Dad pulled out a diagram of our bodies connected in a horrific star pattern. Our spines fused at the center. The pain is temporary, but family. Family is forever. I lunged for Emma as she went limp, but Dad moved faster than I'd ever seen him move. He dragged her to the dining table, which I now saw had leather restraints bolted to its surface. My hands shook as I backed toward the kitchen, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. Mike crashed into the barricaded door, shoulder first. The wood groaned but held firm. Dad had reinforced it with metal brackets while we weren't looking. He always planned everything so carefully. Dad strapped Emma's wrist down with practiced efficiency. He'd clearly rehearsed this. The surgical tools gleamed under the harsh overhead lights he'd installed, transforming our childhood dining room into an operating theater. I grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the sideboard, Mom's favorite, the one she'd inherited from her mother. Mike kicked at the door hinges, desperation making him sloppy. Dad glanced over, disappointed, like Mike was a child throwing a tantrum. He pulled out a second anesthesia mask, holding it loosely in one hand while adjusting Emma's position with the other. I threw the vase. It shattered against Dad's shoulder, crystal fragments scattering across the white sheets. He stumbled. More from surprise than pain, the mask fell from his hand, rolling under the china cabinet. I dove for it, but Dad's foot came down on my wrist. Not hard enough to break bones, just enough to make me let go. He helped me up gently, brushing glass from my hair with trembling fingers. His eyes were wet, unfocused, seeing something beyond this room. Mike had given up on the door and was pulling at the boards covering the windows. The nails squealed but held. Dad guided me to a chair beside Emma, who was starting to stir. He produced zip ties from his pocket, the heavy, duty kind, and secured my wrist to the chair arms. I tested them immediately. No give. He'd thought of everything, just like always. Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and terrified. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak moan. Dad stroked her hair, humming Mom's lullaby, the one about mockingbirds and diamond rings. His hands were steady now, purposeful. He'd found his calm place, the one he went to when he was fixing things around the house. Mike had pried one board loose, revealing the night beyond, but Dad had installed metal mesh behind the glass. Even if Mike broke the window, we weren't getting out that way. Dad noticed Mike's progress and reached for a syringe from his medical layout. I thrashed against the zip ties, feeling them cut into my skin. Dad paused, looking at me with such sadness. He set the syringe down and cupped my face in his hands. They smelled like antiseptic and Mom's lavender hand cream. He explained his plan in the same voice he'd used to teach us to ride bikes. 4 small incisions just below the shoulder blades. I've studied for months, consulted with veterinarians who have separated conjoined animals. The process in reverse can't be that different. We'd share a circulatory system, neural pathways. When one of us felt joy, we'd all feel it. When one hurt, we'd all hurt. True family unity. Mike had stopped attacking the window. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the medical diagram Dad had taped to the wall, our bodies arranged like a human flower, connected at the spine. Dad had even drawn our faces, all smiling. Emma started crying, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks. Dad wiped them away with sterile gauze, telling her about the apartment he'd prepared in the basement. 4 beds arranged in a circle, a bathroom with special accommodations, a kitchen where we'd cook together. He'd installed a lift system for mobility. We'd never have to leave. Everything we needed would be delivered. He'd already quit his job, liquidated his retirement. This was his life's work now. I felt the zip tie on my left wrist giving slightly. I'd been twisting it against the chair's edge, the wood splintering under the pressure. Dad was focused on preparing his instruments, laying them out in order of use. Mike caught my eye. I tilted my head toward the kitchen, where I knew Dad kept the knife block. Dad filled another syringe, this one for Mike. He approached slowly, like Mike was a spooked animal. Mike backed against the wall, hands raised. Dad's face crumpled. He didn't want to force us. He wanted us to understand, to choose this. He told us about the dreams he'd been having, Mom visiting him, telling him we were drifting apart. She couldn't rest knowing her family was scattered. This was the only way to keep his promise to her, to keep us whole. I wondered how Dad learned to use all those medical tools and plan something this complex. Did he really take online classes while we were sleeping? The way he remembered Mom through her recipes and lullabies mixed with this terrifying plan was so strange. His voice broke on the last word. Mike rushed him. They collided in the center of the room, Mike trying to wrestle the syringe away. Dad was stronger than he looked, grief and purpose giving him an edge. They knocked over the Roman forestand he'd set up, medical supplies scattering across the floor. I worked my wrist harder, feeling the plastic dig deeper. Blood made it slippery, harder to grip but also easier to slide. Emma was fully awake now, testing her own restraints. Dad had used leather medical cuffs on her, the kind hospitals use for psychiatric patients. She'd need a key. Dad got Mike in a chokehold. Not tight enough to really hurt him, just enough to make him sluggish. The syringe went into Mike's thigh through his jeans. Mike's struggle slowed, his body going heavy. Dad lowered him gently to the floor, arranging his limbs carefully. The zip tie finally snapped. My wrist was raw, bleeding, but free. I kept my hand still, waiting. Dad was preparing Mike's spot on the table, adding extra padding to support his head. He wanted us comfortable for the procedure. I studied the surgical tools. Most were for cutting, but there was a battery-powered bone saw that caught my attention. If I could get to it, maybe I could cut Emma's restraints. But Dad stayed between me and the instruments, adjusting and readjusting Mike's position. He came for my other wrist, gentle as always. I let him see the blood, the broken tie. His face went white. He dropped to his knees beside my chair, pressing his forehead against my trapped hand. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. He told me he was sorry, so sorry, but this was the only way. He'd tried everything else. Therapy hadn't brought Mom back. The grief groups just made him realize how many families fell apart after loss. He couldn't let that happen to us. He wouldn't survive it. While he cried, I reached for Emma with my free hand. Her restraints were just out of reach. Dad noticed the movement and stood, wiping his face. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, hollow and desperate. He prepared another zip tie, industrial grade this time. As he leaned in to secure my wrist, I grabbed his shirt with my free hand, not violently, just holding on. He froze, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe I understood. Maybe I was choosing this. I told him I missed Mom too, that I dreamed about her every night, that sometimes I still picked up the phone to call her. His grip on the zip tie loosened. I told him about the voicemail I couldn't delete, how I listened to it when the grief got too heavy, how I understood wanting to keep us all together. He pulled me into a hug, crying harder now. Over his shoulder, I saw Emma working at her restraints. The leather was old, starting to crack where she'd been pulling. Mike was beginning to stir on the floor, fighting through whatever Dad had given him. I held Dad tighter, feeling him relax into the embrace. His guard was down, just for a moment. That's when Emma's restraint snapped. Emma rolled off the table, her movement still sluggish from the sedative. Dad released me instantly, turning toward her with alarm spreading across his face. She stumbled, catching herself on the china cabinet, sending surgical instruments clattering to the floor. I yanked my other wrist free from the loosened zip tie while Dad moved toward Emma. She grabbed the bone saw from the scattered tools, holding it between them with shaking hands. Dad raised his palms, speaking in soothing tones about safety and family unity. Mike groaned from the floor, trying to push himself up. His movements were uncoordinated, limbs heavy from the sedative. Dad glanced between all three of us, calculating, planning. He'd always been good at managing multiple problems at once. Emma backed toward the kitchen, keeping the saw pointed at Dad. I slipped out of the chair, my legs cramping from sitting so long. The dining room felt smaller with all of us moving, the white sheets making everything look clinical and strange. Dad reached into his pocket, pulling out a small remote. The doors throughout the house clicked in unison. Electronic locks he'd installed without telling us. Of course he had backup plans. He always thought 3 steps ahead. I grabbed Mike under his arms, trying to help him stand. He was heavier than I expected, his body still fighting the sedative. Emma had reached the kitchen doorway, but the swinging door wouldn't budge. She pushed harder, panic making her movements frantic. Dad approached us slowly, hands visible, explaining that the house was in lockdown mode for our protection. No one could get in or out until morning. He'd programmed it himself, anticipating we might have pre-procedure anxiety. His voice stayed calm, reasonable, like he was explaining a new appliance warranty. Mike finally got his feet under him, leaning heavily against me. His eyes were clearing, focusing on the medical setup with growing horror. He tried to speak, but his tongue was still thick, words coming out slurred and confused. Emma abandoned the kitchen door and moved to the window Mike had been working on. She swung the bone saw at the metal mesh, but it was designed for organic material, not steel. The blade teeth caught and stuck. Dad watched sadly, like we were children throwing tantrums over bedtime. I helped Mike to the wall, letting him use it for support. My mind raced through the house layout, trying to remember any exit Dad might have missed, but he'd been thorough. Every window, every door, even the garage had been secured. Dad picked up the diagram of our conjoined bodies, holding it up like a teacher with a visual aid. He explained the recovery process, how we'd learn to move as one organism. He'd already contacted a specialist in Thailand who'd agreed to consult remotely. Everything was arranged. Emma gave up on the window and turned to face him, still clutching the saw. Her hospital scrubs from work were rumpled, sweat staining the fabric. She looked exhausted, defeated. Dad's expression softened, and he set down the diagram. He told us about the apartment he'd built in the basement. Soundproof walls for privacy, medical equipment for our care, entertainment systems, so we'd never be bored. He'd spent months preparing it, making sure every detail was perfect. His retirement money had covered everything. Mike pushed off from the wall, stumbling toward Dad, not aggressively, just trying to reason with him. Dad caught him easily, guiding him to sit on the floor. Mike's coordination was still compromised, making him easy to manage. I noticed the medical cooler Dad had brought out earlier. Whatever was inside, it was important to his plan. I edged toward it while he focused on Mike. Emma saw my movement and started talking loudly, drawing Dad's attention. She asked about the surgical procedure, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. Dad's eyes lit up. He loved explaining his research. He pulled out a thick binder, flipping through pages of medical diagrams and notes, months of preparation documented in careful detail. I reached the cooler and lifted the lid. Ice packs surrounded several medical bags filled with clear fluid, 4 solutions labeled with our names. Dad had thought of everything, even our different blood types and medical histories. He noticed me at the cooler and smiled proudly. Those were specialized solutions to keep us stable during the procedure. He'd had them custom made by a compounding pharmacy. The pharmacist thought they were for veterinary use. Dad was always clever with his cover stories. Emma moved while he was distracted, heading for the china cabinet again, but instead of grabbing tools, she went for Mom's china. She picked up a serving platter, one of the pieces Mom had treasured most. Dad's attention snapped to her immediately. She held the platter high, ready to smash it. Dad's face went pale. He begged her not to, explaining how Mom had saved for months to buy that set, how she'd only used it for special occasions, how destroying it would be like destroying a piece of her. While he focused on Emma, I grabbed one of the Roman 4 bags with my name on it. The solution inside was cold, heavier than I expected. Mike was trying to stand again, using the wall for leverage. His movements were more coordinated now, the sedative wearing off. Emma's hands shook as she held the platter. She didn't want to destroy Mom's things either, but she needed Dad distracted. She let it slip slightly, making him lunge forward to catch it. That's when Mike moved. He grabbed Dad from behind, trying to pin his arms, but Dad had been doing physical work for months, preparing the house, digging tunnels. He was stronger than Mike expected. They struggled, knocking into the table where Emma had been restrained. I squeezed the Roman 4 bag hard, solution spraying out through the port. It hit the floor, making it slippery. Dad's feet went out from under him as he tried to twist away from Mike. They both went down, Mike losing his grip. Emma set the platter down carefully and grabbed the leather restraints from the table. She tossed one to me. We'd have to work together, just like when we were kids playing capture the flag in the backyard, only now the stakes were real. Dad rolled away from Mike, getting to his knees. His clothes were soaked from the Roman 4 solution, making him look disheveled. For the first time all night, he looked truly hurt, not physically, but emotionally. We were rejecting his gift, his solution to keeping us together. He reached for another syringe from the medical supplies scattered on the floor. Mike grabbed his wrist, but Dad's other hand found a scalpel not to hurt Mike, but to make him let go. The blade glinted under the harsh lights. I looped the leather restraint like a lasso, something I'd learned at summer camp years ago. Emma did the same with hers. We needed to coordinate, just like Dad had taught us. Teamwork makes the dream work, he used to say. Dad pressed the scalpel against Mike's hand, not cutting, just applying pressure. Dad's teaching methods really took an unexpected turn here. From teamwork makes the dream work to let me surgically attach you together forever. That's quite the jump from trust falls and group projects, wouldn't you say? Mike had to let go. Dad stood quickly, backing away from all of us. He looked between his children, tears streaming down his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He told us about the night terrors he'd been having, Mom standing at the foot of his bed, asking why he'd let her family fall apart, how he'd wake up screaming, reaching for her side of the bed only to find it empty. How the only time he felt peace was when we were all together. Emma and I exchanged glances. We'd have to move at the same time. Mike was getting to his feet, ready to help. Dad saw us preparing and backed toward the corner, still holding the scalpel and syringe. He explained that the procedure would only hurt for a moment, then we'd never feel alone again. We'd share everything, thoughts, feelings, sensations. True unity. He'd practiced on lab specimens, perfecting his technique. The success rate was improving. I thought about all the times he'd fixed things around the house, the leaky faucet that took him 3 tries to get right, the ceiling fan that fell twice before he secured it properly. His determination was admirable, but his success rate with complex projects wasn't reassuring. Emma moved first, swinging her restraint at his hand holding the syringe. He dodged, but it put him off balance. I went for his other hand, trying to loop the leather around his wrist. Mike rushed in from the side. Dad dropped the scalpel to grab my restraint, pulling me forward. Emma's second swing caught his shoulder, making him release me. Mike wrapped his arms around Dad's waist, lifting him off the ground. Dad still had the syringe, trying to reach Mike with it. I grabbed Dad's wrist, forcing his hand up. Emma helped, both of us struggling to control the syringe. Dad was crying openly now, begging us to understand. He just wanted his family back. He wanted the pain to stop. The syringe fell, rolling under the china cabinet with the anesthesia mask from earlier. Dad went limp in Mike's arms, sobbing. We'd never seen him like this, completely broken. Mike lowered him gently to the floor. We used the leather restraints to secure his wrists, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to keep him from reaching the medical supplies. He didn't fight us. He just lay there staring at the ceiling, tears pooling in his ears. Emma found his phone in his pocket, but it was locked with a code we didn't know. The house remained sealed, the electronic locks unresponsive to our attempts. We were trapped until morning, just as Dad had planned, only now he was the one restrained. Mike checked the windows again, hoping to find a weakness. The metal mesh was industrial, grade, professionally installed. Dad had hired the best contractors, told them it was for security after a break-in, another clever cover story. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand despite everything. His skin was cold, clammy from shock. He whispered about the tunnels he'd dug, how they connected all our homes, how he'd work at night when we were sleeping, making sure we'd always be connected. Emma searched his pockets more thoroughly, finding keys, receipts, and a small notebook. Inside were detailed schedules of our daily routines, notes about our habits, observations about our mental states. He'd been studying us like specimens. The notebook also contained sketches of the surgical procedure, drawn in Dad's careful hand. Practice runs on paper before the real thing, notes in the margins about potential complications, solutions to problems. He'd been thorough in his madness. Mike found the remote for the electronic locks in Dad's shirt pocket, but it required a code too. Dad had thought of everything, even the possibility that we might overpower him. The backup plans had backup plans. Dad started talking about the day Mom died, how he'd been at home preparing dinner for when she returned from Emma's graduation, how the police officer's face had looked when delivering the news, how the world had tilted and never quite straightened out again. He'd tried to hold us together at the hospital, making us promise to stay close, but promises weren't enough. We'd started drifting anyway, pulled by jobs and relationships in life. He'd felt Mom's disappointment every night, her ghost asking why he'd failed. Emma found another notebook, this one filled with medical research. Articles about conjoined twins, surgical procedures, nerve connections, highlighted passages about shared consciousness and unified existence. Dad had convinced himself this was scientifically possible. The hours passed slowly. We took turns watching Dad, making sure he was comfortable despite the restraints. He'd stopped crying, stopped talking. He just stared at the family photos on the walls, the ones where he'd scratched out our eyes. Mike discovered that the basement door was also locked electronically. Whatever Dad had built down there, we couldn't access it. The entertainment systems, the medical equipment, the apartment designed for our conjoined life all sealed away. I tried to remember the last time our family had been truly happy together. Maybe Christmas 2 years ago, before Mom's diagnosis. We'd played board games and told stories, just like when we were kids. Dad had seemed content then, surrounded by his complete family. Emma sat at the dining table, pushing aside the medical equipment to make space. She found Dad's surgical notes, pages of detailed procedures. He'd even calculated the blood loss, prepared transfusion equipment, nothing left to chance. Dad suddenly spoke, his voice low. He asked if we remembered the camping trip when Mike was 10, how we'd gotten lost on the trail, but stayed together and found our way back. How Mom had said that as long as we stuck together, we could overcome anything. The irony wasn't lost on us. He'd taken Mom's metaphorical advice and twisted it into something literal, something monstrous, but underneath the madness was still our father, broken by grief, desperate to heal an unhealable wound. Mike found emergency supplies in a cabinet, water, energy bars, basic first aid. Dad had stocked up for our recovery period. We ate in silence, the weight of the situation settling over us. Our father had crossed a line we couldn't ignore. As dawn approached, the house remained sealed. Dad had mentioned the locks would disengage in the morning, but we didn't know exactly when. Emma dozed in a chair while Mike and I took turns monitoring Dad. He'd started humming Mom's lullaby again, the one about mockingbirds and diamond rings. His voice was soft, almost peaceful, as if being restrained had finally given him permission to stop fighting, stop planning, stop trying to fix the unfixable. I thought about what would happen when the locks finally opened. We'd have to get Dad help, real help. Not the grief counseling he'd abandoned, but something more intensive. The elaborate preparations, the surgical knowledge, the complete break from reality. He needed professional intervention. Emma woke as the first light filtered through the mesh-covered windows. She checked her phone, which had been in the time. Locked safe until now, dozens of missed calls from work, from friends. The world had continued spinning while we'd been trapped in Dad's grief-fueled fantasy. Mike tested the front door again, still locked. Dad had been precise about the timing, probably programmed it himself. He'd always been good with electronics, teaching himself from online tutorials the same way he'd learned surgery. We found more evidence of his preparations as we searched the house. Medical textbooks hidden in closets, surgical equipment still in shipping boxes, receipts for supplies ordered under false names. The depth of his planning was staggering. Dad asked for water. Emma helped him drink, careful and gentle despite everything. He thanked her, then returned to staring at the ceiling. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a hollow acceptance. The sun climbed higher, casting strange shadows through the metal mesh. The white sheets Dad had hung made everything look sterile, institutional. He'd transformed our childhood home into something unrecognizable. Finally, at exactly 8:00 a.m., the locks disengaged with a series of clicks. The sudden sound made us all jump. Freedom after the longest night of our lives, but also responsibility. We had to decide what to do about Dad. Mike tested the front door. It opened easily, morning air rushing in. The normal world seemed impossibly bright and ordinary after our night of medical horror. Neighbors were getting newspapers, walking dogs, living their uncomplicated lives. We discussed our options in hushed voices. Dad needed help, but involving authorities felt like a betrayal. This was still our father, the man who'd taught us to ride bikes and helped with homework. The grief had broken him, but underneath was still the person we loved. Emma made the decision. She called a psychiatric facility she knew through her work, explaining the situation in broad strokes. They had protocols for this kind of breakdown, ways to help without involving law enforcement. Professional intervention, but still within the family. The paramedics arrived quietly, no sirens or drama. They were gentle with Dad, speaking in calm voices as they prepared to transport him. He didn't resist, didn't even seem surprised. Maybe part of him had known this was how it would end. As they led him to the ambulance, Dad turned back to us. His eyes were clear for the first time in months. He apologized, not for trying to keep us together, but for the way he'd tried to do it. For letting his grief twist love into something dangerous. We promised to visit him, to not abandon him during treatment. Real promises this time, not the desperate vows made in a hospital parking lot. We'd find a way to be a family again, just not the way he'd planned. The house felt empty after they left. Medical equipment still scattered everywhere, white sheets hanging like ghosts. The way Dad's body language completely changed when they restrained him is so interesting. Like his mind finally let him rest after months of planning. How did those locks know to open at exactly 8:00 a.m.? Evidence of Dad's break from reality, but also of his love. Twisted, dangerous love, but love nonetheless. We spent the morning cleaning up, packing away the surgical tools and medical supplies. The tunnels between our apartments would need to be filled in, the surveillance equipment removed. Undoing months of Dad's preparations would take time. Emma found the key to the basement apartment. We descended together, needing to see what he'd built. The space was beautiful in its own way, carefully designed for our supposed new life. 4 beds in a circle, just as he described. A monument to his fractured vision of family unity. We sat in the basement, processing everything that had happened. The night had shown us how grief could transform love into obsession, how the desire to heal could become harmful. But it had also shown us something else. We'd worked together, protected each other. Maybe we were still a family after all. The psychiatric facility called with an update. Dad was stable, cooperating with treatment. The doctor mentioned something about complicated grief disorder, about how loss could manifest in extreme ways. They were optimistic about his recovery, given time and proper care. We made plans to visit him the following week, after he'd had time to settle in. We'd need family therapy too, to process our own trauma from the night. The road ahead would be long, but at least we'd walk it together. By choice this time, not by force. The following days blurred together in a haze of contractors and cleanup. Mike hired a crew to fill in the tunnels between our apartments, watching them pour concrete into Dad's elaborate network. The workers kept exchanging glances, clearly wondering what kind of person dug secret passages between family homes. We didn't explain. Emma tackled the surveillance equipment with methodical precision. She found cameras in places we'd never thought to check in, side lamp fixtures, behind picture frames, even sewn into the lining of coats Dad had given us for Christmas. Each discovery made my skin crawl. The violation ran deeper than we'd realized. I focused on the medical supplies, box after box of surgical instruments, anesthesia equipment, Roman 4 stands. The bone saw alone had cost $3,000. I drove it all to a medical waste facility, watching them document each item. The receipt felt like evidence of a nightmare we'd barely escaped. Our first visit to Dad came exactly 1 week later. The psychiatric facility sat on manicured grounds, looking more like a resort than a hospital. We signed in at the front desk, received visitor badges, submitted to a search for prohibited items. Standard procedure, they assured us, though nothing about this felt standard. Dad waited in the common room, wearing regular clothes instead of the GPS pajamas he'd forced on us. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his elaborate plans and controls. When he saw us, his face lit up with genuine joy that made my chest tight. He hugged each of us, his embraces lasting too long, his fingers pressing into our backs like he was memorizing our shapes. The staff watched from a respectful distance, trained to spot concerning behaviors. I wondered what they saw in our stiff responses, our careful maintenance of personal space. Dad showed us his room with pride, pointing out the narrow bed, the small desk, the window with its view of the garden. He'd already decorated with family photos, the ones where our eyes weren't scratched out. The normalcy of it felt surreal after everything we'd witnessed. He explained his daily routine with enthusiasm. Group therapy at 9:00, individual sessions at 2, art therapy on Wednesdays. He'd made friends, he claimed, gesturing to other patients who nodded politely. The structured environment seemed to calm him, though his eyes still tracked our every movement. During lunch in the cafeteria, Dad reached across the table repeatedly, touching our hands, our arms, our faces. Each contact felt like a test of boundaries. Emma pulled back first, then Mike. I let him hold my hand briefly before gently extracting it. His face fell with each withdrawal. He talked rapidly about his treatment, about understanding his grief distortions and learning healthy attachment styles. Therapeutic language sounded rehearsed, like he was performing for an audience. Underneath, I could see the same desperate need that had driven him to plan our surgical fusion. When visiting hours ended, Dad's composure cracked. He grabbed Emma's wrist as she stood to leave, his fingers tight enough to leave marks. The staff intervened smoothly, professionally, but I saw the flash of his old determination. He wasn't cured, he was simply contained. Back at the house, we continued the dismantling process. The California King bed went to charity, replaced with 3 separate twins. We reinstalled doors throughout the house, savoring the simple pleasure of privacy. Each change felt like reclaiming territory from Dad's obsessive vision. Mike discovered Dad's workshop in the garage, where he'd practiced his surgical techniques. Mannequins lay on makeshift operating tables, their plastic bodies marked with incision lines. Detailed notes covered the walls, documenting failed attempts and refined approaches. The dedication was horrifying in its thoroughness. Emma found financial records that made us all sick. Dad had spent over $200,000 on his planned medical equipment, construction costs, specialized locks, and surveillance systems. He'd emptied his retirement accounts, taken out loans against the house. The financial devastation matched the emotional wreckage. We met with a lawyer to understand our options. Dad had put the house in a trust with all our names, making decisions complicated. We'd need his cooperation to sell it, to access funds for his ongoing treatment. The legal tangles felt like one more way he'd bound us together. The second visit to the facility went worse than the first. Dad had prepared a presentation, complete with handwritten charts, showing how we could still maintain enhanced family closeness within therapeutic boundaries. His compromise involved daily video calls, weekend visits, and eventually moving to apartments in the same building. When we explained that we needed more space, more time, his face cycled through emotions like a broken television. Hurt, anger, desperation, then a calculating calm that made my stomach drop. He agreed too easily, smiled too brightly. We left feeling more unsettled than reassured. That night, the facility called. Dad had attempted to leave, claiming a family emergency. When stopped, he'd become agitated, insisting we were in danger without him. They'd had to sedate him, move him to a more secure wing. The setback felt inevitable, but still devastating. We took turns visiting after that, never going as a complete group. The separation seemed to help Dad focus on individual relationships rather than his collective fantasy. With Emma, he talked about her career. With Mike, sports and work. With me, he shared memories of Mom that felt both precious and painful. During my solo visits, I saw glimpses of the father I remembered from before. He helped another patient with a jigsaw puzzle, his patience endless. He laughed at a therapy dog's antics, the sound genuine and warm. These moments gave me hope, even as I remained vigilant for signs of his obsession returning. The house sale proceeded slowly. Buyers were scarce once they learned about the modifications, the removed doors, the drilled walls, the tunnel entrances in the basement. We had to price it below market value, accepting the financial loss as part of our recovery process. Emma returned to work. Though she struggled with trust, her boss's willingness to believe Dad's lies about her mental state had shaken her confidence. She transferred to a different department and rebuilt her reputation slowly. The promotion she'd earned before Dad's interference remained out of reach. Mike started dating again, cautiously. He installed his own security system, changed his locks regularly, and checked for cameras with paranoid thoroughness. His new girlfriend understood his need for caution. Having her own family trauma, they took things slowly, both carrying invisible wounds. I found myself checking life 360 obsessively, not to track my siblings, but to ensure Dad's location remained fixed at the facility. The app that had been his tool of control became my security blanket. Emma and Mike kept it too, a shared acknowledgement of our ongoing fear. 3 months into Dad's treatment, his doctor requested a family session. We sat in a circle, the therapist guiding us through structured conversations about boundaries, grief, and healthy relationships. Dad participated earnestly, but I caught him staring at the space between our chairs as if measuring the distance. He apologized individually to each of us, specific acknowledgments of harm that the therapist had clearly coached him through. The words were right, the tone appropriate, but his hands kept sketching small movements, as if practicing surgical techniques on invisible bodies. The therapist noticed too, making notes. We established new visiting schedules, communication limits, and plans for eventual reintegration. Everything got documented, signed, and filed away. The paperwork felt like armor against future violations, but paper hadn't stopped him from removing our doors, from digging tunnels, from planning to surgically conjoin us. The facility increased Dad's supervision after he was found hoarding medical supplies from the infirmary. Nothing dangerous, bandages, tape, basic instruments, but the intent was clear. His obsession had adapted to his environment, finding new expressions within institutional constraints. We attended our own therapy sessions individually and together. The trauma bond Dad had tried to create surgically already existed psychologically. We'd survived something together that no one else could fully understand. Our shared experience connected us in ways both healing and painful. 6 months after that terrible anniversary dinner, we gathered at Mike's apartment for a small memorial for Mom. No elaborate meal, no formal ceremony, just the three of us sharing memories and tears. We kept the gathering secret from Dad, knowing he'd see our exclusion as abandonment. His treatment progressed in cycles, good months where he seemed genuinely engaged in recovery, followed by setbacks where his obsession resurfaced in new forms. He created elaborate art projects featuring connected figures. He organized group activities designed to foster family unity among patients. The staff recognized the patterns and adjusted his treatment accordingly. We sold the family home to a young couple who planned to renovate completely. Watching them walk through rooms where we'd been held captive felt surreal. They talked excitedly about opening up the floor plan, unaware they were erasing the physical evidence of our trauma. The proceeds from the sale went toward Dad's ongoing care and paying off his debts. We kept nothing for ourselves, wanting no financial ties to his obsession. Starting fresh meant accepting the losses: monetary, emotional, psychological. Recovery came with a price tag we're still paying. Thanks for letting me tag along and explore all this with you. It's been a really fascinating time together. Hope we get to do it again soon. Subscribe for more content like this.